The call the member for Corangamite.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Social Services Legislation Amendment, Youth Employment and Other Measures Bill of 2015. Mr Deputy Speaker, as we've heard, this bill introduces a number of important measures in the social services portfolio, including 2015 budget measures and several measures previously introduced in the Social Services and Other Legislation Amendment 2014 Budget Measures No. 4 bill. But tonight I would like to focus on what our government is doing, Mr Deputy Speaker, to help get young people into work. And that's very much the focus of the initiatives and the measures that are contained in this bill. And it's disappointing, I think, and I reflect on some of the recent contributions in this debate from members opposite, it's disappointing to hear about this focus on fairness and this focus on what our government is doing, Mr Deputy Speaker, when let's not forget that we have inherited a terrible trajectory of debt and deficit, a debt trajectory of $667 billion. And it was quite laughable, I have to say, to hear the member for Lilley talking about the importance of delivering a surplus. He delivered 6 record deficits, never delivered a surplus, trashed our economy. We came into government in 2013 with rising unemployment. And I'm very pleased to say, and we are all focused, I think, on both sides of the House on the importance of measures to help young people get into work. I'm very pleased to say that under this government, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are creating jobs at 3 times the rate compared with what Labor was doing in its last year in office. We are seeing a downward trajectory on unemployment from 6.25% to 6%. We are seeing growing confidence. We are seeing great excitement about the importance that we are placing on small business. Let's not forget, one of the most important employers for young people is small business, Mr Deputy Speaker. And in the previous government, 519,000 people lost their job across the small business sector. Now, in the region I proudly represent, in the Geelong region, the Corangamite electorate, so many young people get their first start in life in a small business. And it was really a disgraceful record, and that's why we have put so much effort into turning around the fortunes for small business. The $20,000 instant asset tax write-off, the tax cut, the tax discount for unincorporated small businesses. The poor old Leader of the Opposition forgot 2/3 of small business in his budget reply speech, as we well recall. So we have a very strong focus because we know how important small business is in driving our economy, and we know how important small business is in employing young people. So we are proudly championing our measures for small business as part of our $5.5 billion jobs and small business package under the budget. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am going to focus tonight on the measure which introduces a 4-week waiting period for youth under 25. And we're well aware, of course, that the measure replaces the under-30s measure in the 2014-15 budget. The total cost of the reversal is $1.8 billion, so a very significant investment that we are making. But I do want to reflect on this change in policy, and it was the right decision. And it's very important to point out there were a number of very important exemptions to that 6-month wait that was proposed in last year's budget, but nevertheless I was a strong advocate for a change in that policy, and I am delighted that the Social Services Minister and the previous Social Services Minister were so receptive to my representations I made on behalf of young people in Corangamite. We are facing some unemployment challenges, there's no doubt about it, but I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are a region of great opportunity. And just on the weekend I was talking about the new regional rail link and the fact that it's now quicker to travel from Geelong to Southern Cross Station than it is from many outer suburbs of Melbourne, which presents our region with some great opportunities to move down to Geelong, even if you do need to continue to work in Melbourne, to build a house, to set up and as I say, to access the great schools, the great hospitals, the great lifestyle, and to raise a family in our great part of the world. Mr Deputy Speaker, from 1 July 2016, as set out in this budget, young people under 25 who are the most job-ready, who apply for Youth Allowance Other or Special Benefit, will serve a 4-week waiting period before becoming eligible for a payment. And by job-ready, it's important to point out that is someone who lives in an area with good employment opportunities, who has reasonable language, literacy and numeracy skills and has recent work experience. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, you would not know it hearing from members opposite, but there are a range of important exemptions, and we recognise that some young people do need that assistance straight away. But we want to make sure, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this measure gives young people the incentive to go out and look for work, not to walk straight from the school gate to Centrelink. We want to avoid that culture. We want to positively drive the incentive for young people to go out and look for their opportunities, and we want to support them on the way. So I just want to make it very clear that students will not be subject to the 4-week waiting period, and in recognition of the importance of education and training in preventing future unemployment, young people who return to school or take up full-time vocational education or university study will be able to seek more suitable payments such as Youth Allowance Student, and will therefore not be subject to the waiting period. Job seekers who've been assessed as having significant barriers to finding a job will also not be required to serve the 4-week waiting period. And I often talk, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the importance of governing with compassion and care, and in these exemptions we are seeing a government which is incredibly mindful that not all young kids get the best start in life. Not all young kids live in a happy home. There are many young people who live in very difficult circumstances, and they need our help from day one. There are a range of other important exemptions to the 4-week waiting period. If someone has served a 4-week waiting period in the last 6 months, they won't have to do so again. If someone has a disability or an activity test exemption, so if they're pregnant or in the last 6 weeks of their pregnancy, they won't have to serve this waiting period. And of course there are a couple of other important exemptions as well. The government will make sure that only youths aged 16 to 25 will have to serve the waiting period, and that there are some cases where a person under 16 can be on a special benefit. So what we're trying to do, Mr Deputy Speaker, is strike the right balance, because it's estimated that 6.5 million young people under the age of 25 are living at home with 1 or 2 parents. And what's important in terms of, as I say, a government that governs with compassion, governs with care, is that there is also a ministerial discretion where the minister has the power to draft new exemptions if they are required. So I particularly want to commend the Minister for Social Services for the way that he has responded to this challenge, because let's not forget we have a massive challenge in fixing Labor's mess, fixing the debt and deficit that we inherited, trying to find those savings but in a responsible and fair way. And boy, oh boy, can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, have we seen not a more appalling example of unfairness than the Labor Party's decision to oppose an increase in the pension of some $30 a fortnight for the most vulnerable of pensioners? There are members, even on their own, members opposite, who are also shaking their heads privately. It was a callous decision. It was a decision that shows that the modern Labor Party has utterly lost its way. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the minutes remaining in the time that I have allocated, I want to talk about a very important youth employment strategy, because what we saw previously, which is why we never saw any inroads into the terrible situation that we do have in some parts of the country with youth unemployment, we saw Labor tinkering at the edges. What we are delivering in this budget is a $331 million youth employment strategy. This includes a $212 million transition to work program to help disengaged young people aged 15 to 21 years become job ready. Now, this program will commence on the 1st of January 2019. 16. So eligible young job seekers will receive intensive support from community-based organisations. So in many respects doing a far broader job than was done under the Youth Connections. This is a far more comprehensive program looking at every possible need for a young disengaged person wanting to get out of the welfare trap and find that job. And I know, Mr Deputy Speaker, there is great interest in the Corangamite community, the many agencies across my electorate who work so hard to help those who most need help. So this is a fantastic program. It will be supplemented by $106 million for intensive support to vulnerable young people most at risk of long-term unemployment, including migrants, parents and those who have experienced mental illness. Also, the government has delivered an $18 million national work experience program for around 6,000 job seekers annually, particularly young people. And this again is incredibly important in giving young people the opportunity, giving them the confidence, and actually giving employers the confidence that they can take someone on and see how someone can blossom and flourish in the role, and give employers the incentives to hire a young person. Very importantly, and we saw none of these measures under the previous Labor government, employers now have the option of offering a $6,500 wage subsidy to a young person who was engaged obviously as someone who was a job seeker. This is an incredibly important measure, again driving that incentive for employers to say, I am going to employ someone young. There is an incentive there. Sometimes there are additional resources required to train someone who is young, who doesn't have the same experience, but an incredibly important incentive. Along with the National Work Experience program, along with the wage subsidy, there's also a $14 million early school leaver program to improve educational outcomes. So what we are seeing, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a very comprehensive set of measures to address youth unemployment in my electorate and across the nation. And simply speaking, these were not the sorts of measures that we saw under the previous government. So I have to say it's disappointing that we are not seeing support for the bill. Some of these measures will revolutionise the life of a young person. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm very proud of what we are also doing locally, and I'll just briefly mention some very important measures. The Geelong Employment Connections program, we've just added another $1.3 million, which has just helped to fund the Jobs Fair. $95,000 to the Jobs Fair over 2 days, last Friday and Saturday, a great success, making sure that every possible job is presented together in a cohesive way, bringing together job seekers and agencies and other organisations. That money will be used over the next 2 years to create job creation programs, grassroots programs, and already there's an example, the 45 Plus program. I visited a group who were attending that program just recently, and around 4 to 5 are now they've now secured full-time work, which is incredibly exciting. The Geelong Region Innovation and Investment Program, a program that has delivered some 750 jobs, that is well on the way to delivering close to 1,000 jobs as we see the last round close and further applications be considered. An incredibly important fund for our region. All of the $15 million has been provided by our government, which was allocated as the Commonwealth spend, only $4.5 million from the state, and unfortunately the $7.5 million promised by the state Victorian government has been reneged upon, and they are now refusing to place that money into the fund, which frankly is a disgrace, which is hurting our region and hurting job seekers. Our $155 million growth fund focused on areas affected by the end of car manufacturing, a very important fund, a $30 million skills and training program, a $15 million boost to the automotive industry structural adjustment fund, $20 million in an auto diversification program, and a $60 million next generation manufacturing investment program. Our industry growth centres are being rolled out. I'm working very hard advocating for the Growth Centre in Advanced Manufacturing to come to our region. We have the ABS Centre of Excellence, the NDIA headquarters, very important Commonwealth agencies in our region delivering jobs. P-TECH, a very important initiative in our schools, linking industry with a disadvantaged school, and the first one to be rolled out across Corangamite. So many important measures to help young people get into work. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker.